A forbidden spark ignites at my best friend's house when his gaze finds mine, and every rule I ever trusted begins to shake. I didn't plan to stay late. I came for study notes and a cup of tea, the kind of quiet evening that keeps life tidy. The hallway smelled like rain and orange soap, and the kitchen light made everything look softer than it deserved. Then he walked in, barefoot, hoodie half-zipped, hair damp from a rushed shower, and the world I knew thinned to a humming wire. He said my name like he was surprised the syllables had always been there waiting for his mouth to find them. I answered with a joke because nerves dress up as humor when they can't afford honesty. He smiled back, not the kind of smile people use for politeness, but the kind that lands and lingers, a hand on the small of the back guiding gently and claiming nothing. I felt heat rise to the surface of skin I'd been living in all my life without noticing how close it sat to flame. He poured tea for both of us without asking, a small, unassuming kindness that made my chest loosen. We talked about nothing in particular. Music that bruises in the best way, cities we wanted to taste, the map of his knuckles from old basketball injuries. Storm clouds pressed their palms to the windows. The house exhaled each time the wind leaned in. I saw the photo on the fridge. The three of us at a summer fair, my grin unguarded, his arm thrown around his sister's shoulders, my head tilted toward him like some future had already started drafting itself. I looked away too fast, sharp with the thought that I didn't want to be the kind of person who reads destiny into magnets and Polaroids. He caught the glance without calling it out. Instead, he asked about my day, the question people lob like a pebble. With him, it felt like a hand cupped around a candle, inviting flame to stand up taller. Words spilled, more than necessary, the truth shaped without makeup. He listened in a way that rearranged my heartbeat. The rhythm softened and made room. I realized how hungry I'd been for a gaze that didn't categorize me, didn't file me under always available, always fine. That hunger scared me. Hunger has a habit of rewriting rules, of turning never into maybe, and maybe into already. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself this was a hallway moment, a passing tremor. But when thunder cracked and the lights flickered, his shoulders tensed the way mine did, like we shared an old language of weather. He laughed, low, unbothered, and lit a candle from the drawer, the match flaring bright enough to show the steadiness in his hands. That tiny, ordinary competence knocked something loose in me. Safety can be dangerous when you've lived too long without it. I heard footsteps upstairs and remembered why the air felt tight. The person I loved like family would never expect me to stand here, held in place by a gravity that had chosen me without permission. He leaned against the counter, polite distance that felt like mercy. "You okay?" he asked. The words were simple. The subtext was not. I said I was fine, because fine is a small boat that carries people across choppy truths. The kettle hissed. The candle made halos on the tiled wall. I took my cup with both hands to hide the tremor and found, inside that small ritual, a confession I was not yet brave enough to speak. I wanted this to be the start of something and was terrified of the cost. In that moment, my life divided itself quietly. Before, tidy, safe, governed by borrowed lines. After, a corridor of possibilities pulsing under my skin. Nothing happened beyond tea and talk and a candle refusing to be threatened by wind. And yet everything happened. I left with the storm still muttering, the scent of orange soap stitched into my coat, and his voice tucked behind my ear like a secret I could feel but not name. On the walk home, I understood with a clarity that frightened me. Sometimes danger arrives dressed as gentleness, and sometimes gentleness is exactly what makes it so impossible to resist. Secret glances turn to late-night messages and stolen moments, a slow burn that melts the lines I swore I wouldn't cross. It started with an accident, a photo I posted, nothing dramatic, just a cup of coffee and morning light. He reacted with a single word, peaceful. And somehow that one word found the small, restless ache inside me that never quite slept. We began to talk about harmless things, songs that ache in the chest, books that ruin sleep in the best way, how silence feels different depending on who shares it. Then the hour grew later and the replies slower, and there it was, the pause that feels like permission. One message became 2, then 10, then hundreds. There was no plan, no promise, just the rhythm of conversation that stretched past midnight until birds started claiming the sky again. I learned the shape of his thoughts, the cadence of his humor, the small cracks in his confidence that he never showed anyone else. Each time my phone lit up, the world rearranged itself, centering on the space between his words and mine. I told myself we were friends, that this was innocent, but innocence has a way of disguising itself as curiosity. The way he said goodnight felt like a touch that hadn't yet found skin. When we met again at his sister's place, the air carried a quiet tension that only we could feel. Every shared glance felt heavier than conversation could bear. One evening, while everyone else was distracted, he brushed past me in the hallway. It was nothing more than the whisper of fabric, but my pulse forgot how to behave. His voice found my ear, low, uncertain. "We should probably stop this before it turns into something we can't undo." I laughed softly, pretending to agree, pretending not to want what was already happening. "Probably," I said, though every syllable trembled with contradiction. We didn't stop. Instead, we learned how to exist between boundaries. Stolen minutes when no one watched, laughter disguised as coincidence, the electric closeness of shared secrets. There was something exquisite in the restraint, the way we hovered just short of a touch, as though prolonging the ache was its own form of devotion. I'd catch his scent on my clothes after leaving, a trace of cedar and rain, and it would undo me. I'd replay moments, building invisible stories from glances, from pauses, from the way his thumb lingered over his phone before sending a message he knew might push us closer to the edge. It wasn't only desire. It was recognition, like finding a hidden version of myself reflected back in someone else's eyes. He saw me not as his sister's friend, but as a person carved from the same contradictions he carried, cautious and reckless, loyal and longing. But with every heartbeat that pulled me nearer, the guilt grew teeth. Loyalty whispered warnings at night, yet the ache to hear from him always won. I told myself I could balance it, that love could exist quietly, without breaking what came before. The lie felt almost noble until I realized that hiding doesn't make feelings smaller. It only teaches them how to burn in silence. When he looked at me across a crowded room, the world dimmed around the edges. Every smile from him was a secret. Every silence was an echo of something waiting to be spoken. We were building a bridge between right and wrong, and each step forward made the drop beneath us deeper. I didn't know where this would lead. I only knew I was already falling, slowly, deliberately, helplessly. And he was falling too, meeting me halfway in a descent that felt both terrifying and inevitable. Rain pins us inside, and the storm outside becomes honest inside. First touch, first kiss, confession, like lightning and shelter in the same breath. The sky broke open the night it happened. Sheets of rain carved paths down the windows, thunder rolling like an untamed heartbeat in the distance. I'd gone to drop off something for his sister, a borrowed jacket, a harmless excuse. But the storm had other plans. She wasn't home, and he stood in the doorway, hair damp, voice soft, saying, "You'll have to wait it out." I stepped inside, pretending not to feel the pulse in my throat. The house felt smaller, quieter, as though it knew a secret it wasn't ready to tell. He made tea just like before, the same candle flickering between us. The silence stretched, not awkward, just alive, charged with everything we hadn't said. Rain pressed against the walls like an audience, and I felt the air shift, thick with something unnamed. He sat across from me, elbows on his knees, eyes steady but searching. "Do you ever think about that night?" he asked, the words cautious, almost guilty. I could have lied, could have played the part of the innocent friend, but my voice betrayed me. Every day, the space between us dissolved. He didn't move fast. He moved like someone afraid to break something fragile. His hand reached for mine, and when our fingers met, it was as if the room tilted, time bending to accommodate what had always been waiting. The first touch wasn't fireworks. It was recognition, a quiet yes that echoed through every nerve. He whispered my name once, and it sounded different now, softer, reverent. The kiss happened in the hush between thunder and lightning, slow at first, like testing reality, then deeper, hungrier, until everything else ceased to matter. His hands trembled, not from hesitation but from the weight of wanting. Mine found his heartbeat, steady and wild under my palm, and in that moment, the world outside could have disappeared and I wouldn't have noticed. There was no music, no script, just breath, warmth, and the taste of something forbidden and right all at once. When he pulled away, he rested his forehead against mine, eyes closed, voice barely a whisper. "This feels like trouble," he said, smiling in that broken way that means you already know it's too late. "It feels like truth," I answered, and that was worse because truth doesn't fade when the rain stops. We sat there, tangled in the quiet, as the storm softened to a drizzle. Every drop that hit the roof felt like a heartbeat syncing with ours. I wanted to freeze time, to live forever in that suspended moment where everything was raw and simple. But simplicity never lasts. He brushed a strand of hair behind my ear, his thumb tracing the corner of my jaw. "What happens now?" he asked. I didn't have an answer. Love doesn't announce its next move. It just unfolds, beautiful and reckless. I only knew that I couldn't unfeel what had just happened. Something inside me had opened, and I couldn't close it without tearing something vital. When the rain eased, I stood at the door, my pulse still echoing against his. Neither of us spoke goodbye. We didn't need to. The silence between us was already filled with everything that mattered. As I walked into the wet night, the world smelled of thunder and change. Every step felt heavier, every breath fuller. I knew this wasn't just desire. It was the beginning of something that could break me or remake me completely. And maybe that's what love really is. A storm that leaves you standing in ruins, somehow grateful for what it destroyed. Guilt and longing wrestle for oxygen as I weigh loyalty against truth, terrified that loving him might cost me my oldest bond. The days after the storm felt different. Every sound carried his memory. The kettle boiling, the faint tap of rain, even the soft vibration of my phone. We didn't talk much. Maybe silence felt safer, or maybe we both feared what words could do now. Love had entered like lightning, beautiful, uncontrollable, and left behind a smoke that clung to everything. His sister noticed first. She asked why I'd been quiet lately, why I left early when I used to stay for hours. Her voice was warm, teasing, trusting. That trust sat heavy in my chest, pressing against the secret I couldn't confess. I smiled, said I was just tired, the same kind of lie that starts as protection and ends as poison. But guilt doesn't fade. It multiplies in the quiet. I caught myself replaying that night, the candlelight, the thunder, his voice trembling between apology and desire. It wasn't just what happened. It was what it meant. It meant I'd crossed a line drawn by someone I loved long before I ever saw him as anything more than the boy who lived down the hallway. Every time I saw his sister's face, laughter bright and unguarded, my stomach tightened. She spoke about him often, without suspicion, without knowing that every casual mention was another cut. "He's been strange lately," she said once, frowning. "Quieter. You'd think he was hiding something." I wanted to scream he is, but the words turned to ashes on my tongue. I started avoiding their house. I said I was busy, sick, buried in work. Lies became routine, stitched into my voice until I almost believed them. But one night, as I sat by my window watching the streetlight flicker, my phone buzzed. His name appeared. Just that one name was enough to undo every boundary I'd rebuilt. "Can we talk?" The message felt simple, but simplicity is deceptive. It took me half an hour to answer. "You know we shouldn't." "I know," he replied. "But I can't stop thinking about you." There it was, the truth I was too afraid to say. The truth that made guilt feel like gravity. I agreed to meet him one last time, I told myself. Just to end it properly. But endings rarely go as planned. We met by the river, where city lights fractured on the surface like broken stars. The air smelled of damp leaves and regret. He looked tired, eyes rimmed with something I recognized, Sleepless honesty. I can't pretend it didn't happen, he said, stepping closer. And I can't pretend I don't want it to happen again. I wanted to be strong, to say all the reasonable things. We can't, it's wrong. She'd never forgive me. But every argument dissolved when his fingers brushed mine. There's a point where logic becomes background noise to heartbeat. I tried to pull away, but he caught my hand gently, as if he knew how fragile my resistance was. I'll walk away if you tell me to, he whispered. But don't lie, not to me, not to yourself. And in that moment, I realized the cruelty of honesty. It demands you choose between hurting someone else or yourself. I chose silence, and silence was its own kind of answer. He nodded slowly, like he understood everything I couldn't say, and when he left, the emptiness felt like punishment. For days, I carried that emptiness like a wound no one could see. Love had become a contradiction, a place of warmth and ruin at once. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw two versions of myself, the loyal friend and the woman who had touched truth with trembling hands. I didn't know which one I wanted to be anymore. Intimacy grows as trust deepens, gentle, mutual, and healing, teaching my body and soul to exhale without fear. Time has a way of softening guilt, not erasing it, but folding it into something quieter. Weeks passed. We tried to go back to normal, but normal no longer fit. Every casual word, every glance in a shared room hummed with the memory of what we'd been and what we were still trying not to be. Yet the universe, cruel or kind, kept crossing our paths. A family dinner, a birthday gathering, a chance encounter at a bookstore. Each time, fate pressed us closer until pretending not to feel became exhausting. The night it changed again, there was no storm, no candlelight, no dramatic confession, just a stillness that felt like permission. He'd come to return a borrowed book. We stood by the doorway too long, conversation lingering on the edge of something unnamed. I could smell the faint trace of his cologne, the warmth of skin beneath fabric, and suddenly distance felt impossible. He didn't ask this time. He just looked at me, long enough for my heartbeat to answer for me. When he leaned in, everything inside me said yes before my mind had time to object. The kiss was different now, less question, more truth. The tension that had lived between us for weeks melted into something tender, something that asked for nothing but presence. We moved carefully, as though the air might break. His hands traced slow patterns down my back, patient, deliberate, reverent. It wasn't about hunger anymore. It was about knowing, about finally being seen without flinching. Every breath, every heartbeat, felt like a language only we understood. It was the kind of intimacy that wasn't rushed or reckless. It was an act of trust, of surrender without shame. He whispered things between breaths, not promises, not declarations, just fragments of truth. How he'd thought of me in small moments, morning coffee, quiet streets, songs that felt like waiting. I told him how every word he'd ever said had built a home in my chest. There was no space for guilt then, only gratitude, that somehow, in a world that rarely gives second chances, we had found one. When he touched my face, I closed my eyes and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not the absence of chaos, but the kind that comes when you stop fighting your own heart. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't right by anyone's standards, but it was real. Real in the way his breath trembled when he said my name. Real in the way I felt safe enough to be fragile. Later, when the world returned and the moment faded into quiet, I lay beside him, tracing circles on his wrist, listening to the steady rhythm beneath his skin. "We can't keep hiding," I said softly. "I know," he whispered. "But if hiding means I still get to have this with you, even for a while, I'll take it." Those words stayed with me. Love, I realized, isn't always about forever. Sometimes it's about finding someone who reminds you how to feel alive again, even if it's borrowed time. We were learning to breathe together in the space between sin and salvation. When he left that night, the room smelled of him, warm, human, unguarded. I stood by the window, watching the world outside, thinking about how love can be both a rebellion and a refuge. Maybe that's what deep love truly is, the courage to be vulnerable even when you know the cost. I didn't know what the future held. I only knew that something inside me had healed in his arms. The kind of healing that doesn't erase scars but teaches you to see them as proof that you've lived. We stop hiding, accept the fallout, and choose a love both dangerous and tender, fierce enough to stand, soft enough to stay. It didn't happen with a grand reveal or dramatic confrontation. The truth always has its own rhythm. It leaks out through silence, through eyes that linger too long, through the way two people can't seem to look away from each other even when they should. His sister found out one afternoon in the simplest way possible. She walked into the room, saw the way we were standing, and didn't need an explanation. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream could have been. She didn't speak to me for days. When she finally did, her voice was quiet, cracked at the edges. You were the one person I never thought would lie to me. There wasn't a single defense I could offer that didn't sound like betrayal wrapped in justification. I told her I hadn't meant to hurt her, that it wasn't planned, that sometimes love just happens, no matter how hard you try to keep the world neat and safe. She shook her head, tears catching light. That's the problem, she said. It's always just happens until it ruins something. She left, and in that moment, I realized love isn't measured only by who you choose, but by what you're willing to lose for it. The weight of that truth pressed down until I could barely breathe. I almost ended it. I even typed the message, fingers hovering over send, but before I could, he showed up at my door. He didn't ask if it was over. He just stood there, eyes wet, shoulders heavy. She hates me, he said. She'll come around, I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. Maybe not, he said, but I can't go back to pretending I don't love you. The way he said love you wasn't cinematic. It was raw, almost broken, the way a person sounds when they've stripped every layer of pride and self-preservation. I pulled him inside, and in that small motion, I made a choice. To stop hiding. To stop apologizing for feeling something that had already remade me. The weeks that followed were messy, filled with whispers, cold shoulders, and quiet rumors. People talked, people judged. Some offered sympathy. Others looked at me like I'd stolen something sacred. But beneath all of it, something steadier grew, a kind of defiant peace. We didn't need to prove our love. We just needed to live it. We learned to build a life in small, honest pieces. Coffee in the morning light, hands brushing while walking through markets, late-night laughter that belonged only to us. There were days when guilt still flickered, but it no longer ruled us. What had started as a forbidden spark had become something solid, something that asked to be met with both courage and care. He once said, "You were the risk I didn't know I needed to take." And I answered, "You were the safety I didn't know could exist inside danger." That was us. Dangerous and gentle, fierce and soft. The contradiction became our balance. Love didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the hurt we caused or the bridges we burned. But it gave us truth. It gave us the rare chance to live without pretending. And sometimes that's more powerful than forgiveness. Now, when I look back, I don't see scandal or shame. I see two souls who found each other in the chaos and decided to stay when it would have been easier to run. The kind of love that leaves marks not as wounds, but as proof. Proof that we were real, that we dared, that we loved deeply, even when the world said we shouldn't. If you felt this story in your chest, if it reminded you of a love that challenged your rules but healed your heart, don't forget to show it some love back. Like, share, and subscribe, because somewhere out there, someone needs to hear that deep love isn't always perfect, but it's always real. And sometimes that's enough to change everything.